Hello, all. Welcome. We are going to get started in just one moment. Feel free to take a moment to introduce yourself in the chat. Um, we will just get started. We're going to give folks just a moment. We are recording this so that we can post it uh, in when so that other people can enjoy it. But thanks for joining us today. And we'll get started in just 1 minute. Well, I'm impatient and I want to get rolling because we've got some things to discuss this morning or this afternoon. So, first of all, welcome to the May Artivist Town Hall. This is a monthly series that is intended to be a virtual organizing space, a networking space, and also a place where you can get timely and accurate information on what is happening around issues that affect the arts and cultural community. So, without further ado, here we go. That's the end of the slide deck. That's hilarious. One moment. Okay, let's try that again. All right, so we're going to start on the federal level. There is a lot going on in terms of what's happening on the federal level, and we have a couple of resources that we've stood up on our website that are tracking the status of the NEA, the NEH, and IMLS Incorporation for Public Broadcasting. We're not going to talk about those today. We're going to talk about the reconciliation bill that was passed last week in the middle of the night. In fact, literally, they took the vote at 6 a.m. after working all night. And so this is the One Big Beautiful Bill Act that the House passed. So this is a very large package, which is about how the federal government is going to spend their money, but also how they are going to not spend their money and where they are going to eliminate taxes and provide tax cuts to of a variety of income classes. So overall, so there's a lot that is in this bill, and we could do an entire 2-hour session on it. We're going to hit some highlights, and what we've tried to do is pull in things that are of use to the creative sector and to individual artists and creatives. So we're also going to start first with nonprofits. So we the impact on nonprofits is pretty drastic. So first of all, it would increase in taxes on foundation endowments. So that's all of our private foundations would be at a certain threshold. If they're large enough, they would the increase on their taxes would go up, as would universities and colleges endowments would also be taxed at a higher level. It also de-incentivizes corporate giving. It puts in a floor, a 1% floor on charitable contributions. So if a corporation gives less than 1% of its overall revenue, it does not get any sort of deductions or incentives to do that. And so it de-incentivizes them to give less than 1% of their overall revenue, which one would think would help, but will probably in fact hurt charitable giving. It also does something interesting, and this is a little bit about nonprofit employees. So for some nonprofit employees, you are able to access things like tax-free transportation benefits. So you can do those as pre-tax plans where you can set aside money for your T-Pass or your Blue Bike or your mileage or your parking. This would actually put that into the bucket of considering it an unrelated business income tax, or UBIT, one of my favorite terms. And it would actually consider that taxable income that the employee would would have to pay on. The one good thing that this bill does related to nonprofits is it doesn't include a provision which was pretty scary for a lot of us. And this is called the nonprofit killer rule. And this would allow the IRS and the Secretary of the Treasury expanded purview to designate nonprofit some organizations as terrorist supporting organizations and strip them of their nonprofit status. The thing that's particularly concerning about a provision like this is that it doesn't, there's no metrics, there's no rubric, there's no sort of reporting structure or any appeals process. It can just be done because the Secretary of the Treasury decides it should be done. And that level of independent control from the administration is certainly, the expectation is that it would be weaponized. So the good news is that provision was not included. But let us continue. The other piece of news that this is a little bit of good news is that it would allow folks who do not itemize their taxes to get a deduction for charitable giving. And so the limits are for an individual who is not itemizing their taxes, they could deduct up to $150 for any charitable giving they did, and it's $300 for married couples. But then let's talk about other things that are in this bill. There are cuts in funding to Medicaid. And specifically what it would do is it would cut the federal match that states receive for ACA Medicaid expansion. In Massachusetts, that's a big deal. That's a $3 billion cut. And so that would have real impact and a real effect on the Massachusetts ability to pay for things like expanding Medicaid coverage in Massachusetts. It also eliminates funding for Medicare by tightening eligibility requirements. And so in this case, it would eliminate eligibility for undocumented immigrants. Continuing along, it would also limit the access to the expanded child's tax credit. The eligibility would be limited based on income. So if you make too little an amount of money, you would not qualify. And if you have a mixed immigration status in your family, so someone is not an undocumented immigrant, you would not qualify for that child family tax credit. That again is a big deal. That is something that helps a lot of families and frankly helps them to move out of poverty. So that limiting the eligibility is troubling. And then finally, the bill will cut SNAP benefits, and those SNAP benefits are food used to be called food stamps. It does this in a couple of different ways. It increases the work requirements that are required for a recipient to maintain eligibility. It does not allow the state or the SNAP administration offices to provide any sort of exemptions or waivers. The only exemption would be for families with children under the age of 7 would be exempt from that expanded work requirement in order to access those SNAP benefits. And it also reduces the matching funds that the feds pay to the states for administrating that program. Again, this is about an overall shift of financial burden from the federal government to states. So that is a summary of some of the things that are included in the reconciliation bill. So what can you do about it? So as we know, the bill has to go through a couple more steps, and the next step is that the Senate has to vote on their version. And so we are encouraging you to reach out to Senators Warren and Markey. There are a couple of different action emails that you can take advantage of. The first one is really focused on those impacts to nonprofits. So if that is where you feel like you want to spend some of your advocacy time, you can use that. It's a form email. As always, we will repeat. Form emails get disregarded pretty quickly. So if you choose to use their format, we really encourage you to personalize where you're able to in the editable body of that email. The second one is from the Medicare Rights Center, and this is more focused on the Medicaid, Medicare cuts. And again, please personalize. If neither of those action emails feel to your liking, we really encourage you to still reach out to Senators Warren and Markey and share your own personal story. What will this bill, what do some of these provisions mean for you as an arts worker, as a worker in a nonprofit, as an individual and community, as someone who accesses benefits like Medicare, Medicaid, and SNAP benefits, as someone who has an lived experience with any of those pieces? What is good to know is that just yesterday there was a press conference that Senators Warren, Markey, and the governor were at, talking about what these cuts to Medicare and Medicaid will mean in Massachusetts. So they already are opposed to many of the provisions of this bill. And so we don't have to convince them to do the right thing, but we need to provide them with an arsenal of stories and experiences to make sure that our U.S. senators know this is not an isolated issue, that it is not affecting just one part of the state or one part of the constituents that they serve, but it will have real harmful effects across a broad range of issues, including the cultural sector. Okay, I'm going to move us along. I'm also going to remind you in this slide we had up on our last organizing huddle. This is really a time where we as a sector need to make sure we are working arm in arm and we are engaging as many of us as we can. This isn't just as I just said, this isn't just affecting the arts and cultural space. This is affecting our neighbors, our community members, our families. And so as you're thinking about your own personal advocacy, this is a reminder, and Rishlene always reminds us of this, right? Is like, there are other people in your sphere of influence who you should talk to and get engaged in this work. If you are a nonprofit organization, how are you engaging your board members in this work? How are you sharing these quick, actionable steps that they can take to make sure that they are talking with their elected officials? If you're a small business owner, how are you engaging your customers? How are you talking about how you as a small business a creative small business owner are going to be affected by some of these things and why it should matter to them as customers of you? Again, your donors, your audiences, your members, your constituents, and your friends, right? We all are engaged. We need to be engaged in this work, and Mass Creative needs your help to make sure that this message is getting out to more folks. I'm going to move us along to state work. Sorry, I think I might have frozen there for a second. Sorry. So last week, the Senate passed their version of the budget. So Massachusetts is ahead of Congress in this moment. Some things that were included, many things were included in the Senate's budget, but $26 million for the Mass Cultural Council was included, as well as almost $300,000 to $280,000 to the Office of Travel and Tourism. There was also included, they retained an amendment that Senator Mark filed that would fund the poet laureate position at $25,000. And then so those are sort of very specific to the arts and cultural space. The other piece to just know is that within that 26 million, there were several earmarks for specific projects or specific groups. However, those were on top of the amount that the council requested. So it would essentially be level funding for the agency, but none of those earmarks would cut into their ability to make grants the way they did last year. The other two things to just flag here as we continue to think about how how our sector integrates and interacts with other parts of our world. The budget includes a piece which would increase small and medium-sized nonprofits' ability to participate in the core plan. This is a retirement fund or savings program that allows nonprofits like Mass Creative to provide its employees with an employer match for retirement fund savings. And so it would allow more groups to get involved. Or to be eligible. And then the other piece is that it funds the regional transit authorities at $214 million to provide more fare-free programs, right? And we know that regional transit authorities are oftentimes a really important link, especially in rural communities, to get folks to and from arts and cultural events and businesses, and to transport artists and individuals. So we are excited to see that program continue to expand. Here are some things that were not included, unfortunately. So there was no increased state aid to public libraries. They did not include a provision to seed fund the Downtown Vitality Fund. They did not increase funding to the Tourism Trust Fund, which is both for the Office of Travel and Tourism as well as for our regional tourism agencies. They did not include a provision that would protect librarians from personal attacks related to requests for book bans and when books are challenged. It does not increase the budget for the Board of Library Commissioners, and it does not increase the funding for library technologies and resource sharing. And when we talk about library technologies and resource sharing, here are the top three things you could consider. Free Wi-Fi or free hotspots that allow you to sit outside a library and access Wi-Fi, which for many rural communities is the only way they can access Wi-Fi. Apps like Libby that allow you to do electronic downloads or electronic borrowing. And then another one that resource sharing are things like the Minuteman or the Clams network that allow you to request books from other libraries. Doesn't mean these programs are going away, but it does mean at a moment when IMLS just cut a lot of funding to the state's libraries commissioners, that money is not going to be made up from the state at this moment. And so one might think to yourself, this is a big bummer, Emily. Why are you showing us all the things that did not get funded? Because the legislature had to make a lot of really difficult decisions this year. The reality is that the budget writers, right, which are primarily the chairs of Ways and Means on the House and the Senate side, are forecasting out and looking at a very grim picture, as we just described, right, with what's happening on the federal level, of if the federal government starts pulling money away from programs that expand Medicare and Medicaid, pulling away SNAP benefits, pulling away other of funding that has allowed us to provide social safety nets, what that's going to mean is the state is going to have to make even more difficult choices about what they can and can't pay for. And so in both the House and the Senate budgets this year, we saw almost all level funding across existing budget lines, and only in a couple of places did we see increases because they are being very conservative in their budget writing. Okay. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't thank our legislators. So there were things that I just talked about that are good news, right? Like we want to see the Mass Cultural Council budget is the primary place where the state invests its dollars to make sure that there's increased access to arts and culture. And so we want to thank them for that, making sure that that money is continuing to move forward. We also want to thank them for including that provision about funding the poet laureate, right? That was an executive order that the governor signed in to establish the Massachusetts Poet Laureate, but it did not come with any money. And so we want to make sure that whoever is the Poet Laureate gets compensated for their skill and their time and actually has a little bit of resource to do the work that they are charged to do as the state's Poet Laureate. All of those senators voted to pass this budget. So we encourage you to write to all of your senators and thank them. But in particular, you'll see on this slide, there are a number of senators who both Paul Mark sponsored that Poet Laureate amendment and then co-sponsored that amendment. And so those are folks who particularly called out and said, this is something that's a priority for me. And it's really great when we can flag that and thank them for that work. The other thing I would encourage you to just drop in a note to your state senators is your concerns about what federal cuts are going to mean for access to arts and culture in Massachusetts. All of our elected officials talk to each other. Mayor Wu talks to Congresswoman Presley, talks to State Senator Collins, talks to Rep. Moran. And so we want to make sure that all levels of government who are representing you understand how these issues are going to affect the creative sector and to affect you as a constituent and as a voter. And we want to make sure they are armed to tell those stories to their colleagues at different levels of government. Okay. Looking ahead, actually, I'm going to stop sharing at this moment because I want to check in with everybody. That's a lot of information, right? Like that can feel really overwhelming. We know that we are constantly hearing news out of Washington that is meant to sort of destabilize us, meant to challenge us, and meant to distract us from our work. So on some level, I feel like last week was a reasonably good news cycle in terms of distraction. Like it was bad, but it's been worse. But I want to check in with folks. Does anyone have any questions about things that are happening on the state or federal level. John.
Well, I do have a question. So being a part of this conversation, right, as an artist, like how would you say, like how much a part of this conversation are we? And are we more so interjecting in the conversation, or which part of it do we represent? Because that will help me better understand like how to articulate, I guess, what I think my experiences have been. Because I live in Mattapan. So, we depend on things like Snap and all the different stuff that you reference. Um, but yeah, those kind of things are just kind of tricky. So I would just like to know more about like, I guess in my role as arts advocate, like how much am I part of the conversation and how can I be more effective in it?
Yeah, I'm gonna try, John. I'm gonna try to answer this, and if I'm wrong, you tell me, and we can figure this out. So, you're a constituent, you're a voter, you're represented by your elected officials, and so as part of the agreement within a representative democracy, the implicit agreement is that your elected officials are working for you to represent your interests. And so the other part of that responsibility is that you are responsible for sharing with your elected officials what are top priorities that are affecting you, that are affecting your communities, and making sure they're aware of what that means to your daily life, and encourage them to consider that when they are talking with their colleagues, when they're introducing new laws, or when they're taking a vote. Again, as I said earlier, Senator Warren and Senator Markey already oppose most of the provisions in the reconciliation bill that the House passed. So we don't need to convince them of the merits of the argument. What we need to do is provide them with the stories and the experiences to make sure that they know that this is an issue for their constituents. The other piece of your question, which I think is a really good one, is that oftentimes the arts and cultural sector, like all of us, right? Like we don't engage in issues unless we can see like the direct immediate return on investment, right? Or like the direct and immediate impact, right? And so for many, many years, we've all worked together to increase the Mass Cultural Council budget line, right? And we've done a really good job together, right? In 2012, it was $9 million. And I just said it's going to be, cross fingers, around $26 million this year. But there are other pieces of the budget, as I listed out, that affect our creative and arts and culture sector, right? Things like libraries, things like ability of nonprofits to provide benefits to their workers, right? Like that shapes our sector as much as it does the meds and the eds, right? And so we at Mass Creative want to encourage you to not shy away from talking about issues that maybe aren't explicitly cultural policy issues, but certainly affect you, affect your networks, affect your communities, right? We are all folks who need to house and clothe and transport ourselves, right? And when we can say we're in solidarity with folks in housing advocacy, for example, that's a big deal, right? Like, and so that both shows us showing up for other issues in other sectors, but also makes it clear that this issue isn't, the issue of housing isn't a niche issue. It's an issue that affects many different constituencies. Is that helpful, John?
Yeah, it's helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Dan, I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I'm going to have to run very shortly, but I just wanted to tell people in this group that where I'm going off to is for a hearing for the mass flag, seal, and motto campaign commission, who is running a design contest, as insulting as that is, for the mass seal and flag and motto. And the terms of the design contest are that anybody who submits loses all their IP, their intellectual property rights to anything they submit, whether it's used or not. So I'm hoping, I'm going to put some stuff in the chat, but I'm hoping that people will write to them and say, hey, this is not how you do it. You didn't do that when you hired Hill Holiday for the ad campaign for tourism. Why would you do this for the flag and the seal, which are going to be with us for decades? And is also insulting. It's treating graphic designers like they're not professionals, and they are. They wouldn't do it for a set of briefs for a court case. So why aren't they treating, us creatives as professionals? So I'm going to put that in, then I'm going to head out. All right.
Well,
But
thanks, Den, for including that. Please include those links and we'll make sure to amplify that out as well. And
thank
good
you.
luck. Showing
Thank
up at hearings is so important. Thank you very much.
No problem.
All right. Any other questions? Any other items that folks want to raise? Okay. Okay. Well, if that is the case, I am going to share my screen again and talk a little bit about what's coming up. So a week from Friday, the Mass Creative team is really excited that we are going to be out in Northampton at the Northampton Center for the Arts at 33 Hawley for our second annual statewide creative sector summit. So we did this last year in Lowell, which was a lot of fun. And this year we're in Northampton. And the goal of this day is really to focus on how we as a sector are going to meet this moment, right? How are we organizing, advocating, and engaging for stronger communities, particularly when a lot of the things that we care about in Massachusetts and a lot of the ways that we work in Massachusetts are being challenged. I'm so excited that Representative Lindsay Sabadosa and Northampton's mayor will be joining us for welcome remarks. And then the day will end with a keynote speech by Giselle Bird, who's the executive director of the Theater Offensive. And for those of you who may not know, the Theater Offensive was one of the co-plaintiffs that recently sued the National Endowment for the Arts due to requirements that they had put on grant applications that required applicants, not even grantees, but required grant applicants to comply with executive orders that erased trans identities and trans voices. And so we're really proud that the Theater Offensive was one of the plaintiffs who stood up against discriminatory executive orders and the implementation of them in terms of the arts space. And Giselle is going to talk about her vision about what it looks like when we work together to resist and fight against this. We also are going to have a variety of breakout sessions, and depending on how fast Kelsey typed, we may in fact be able to share a link out with a listing of all those breakout sessions right now. If not now, it will come very shortly. But just to give you a taste, we will have sessions that are about, she did it, Kelsey did it. So if you click on the link, you'll see all of this session workshops. But some of them include conversations about arts and climate change and climate justice, thinking about collective action, thinking about how we are building out creative economies and working on creative economic development, policy change for creative sector, thinking about arts workers solidarity movement building, and thinking of, and sharing out some of the really exciting work that's happening around increasing access to arts education, not just in Boston, but in Springfield and in the Berkshires as well. We will also have some art making opportunities, and we promise we will feed you delicious food. So we really are excited to do this again. It feels like there's an interest from our sector to meet annually, to convene, to share what we've learned, to highlight and celebrate some really exciting work, and to be introduced to new topics and new folks. And so we hope you will join us. We're really hoping you will join us. We've made pricing, we hope, as affordable as possible. So we actually have reduced rates if you are a Mass Creative donor or you are a member of the Mass Creative Action Network. You can get discounted rates to join. And then we also have an emerging career professional for those who are 30 or under. That's a lower price. We also still have some scholarships available. So if any price is too high or an obstacle for you to join us, please email us and we will try to get you a scholarship registration as soon as possible. I am just seeing this in the chat. Maddie, thank you so much. Maddie, sorry, Maddie, I believe, are you joining us for the summit?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I was going to let you know I'm going to be sending that contract to you today.
Wonderful.
But
Maddie
yeah,
will be running a session.
yeah, we'll be there with a really fun printmaking activity that is really accessible. You can do it with probably stuff you already have laying around. So I'm excited.
Very cool. And yes, and recognizing that the real pain of losing your first ever NEA grant. So come join us. We will be in solidarity. We will do a little community care with you and hold you in that. That's really rough. And thanks for sharing that out as something that folks can collaborate on. Okay. I just want to acknowledge and thank, I think, yeah, that was my last slide. I want to thank my team. We are all on this call, and all of this work that we are all doing together is made possible thanks to Kelsey and Rashleen and Anissa. And so they are all available to you as well as resources. So Rashleen is our director of organizing, Kelsey is our director of external relations and holds a lot of our policy and government affairs work. Anissa is our Jackie of all trades, but is especially helpful in making sure if you don't know if you're a member of Mass Creatives Action Network, she can let you know right now, and so that you can get access to that discounted registration. But from team Kelsey, Richleen, Anissa, anything else to add today?
I got nothing to add.
Okay. All right, folks. It's Kelsey. All right, folks. Well, unless there are further questions or events or items that live in the world of advocacy policy in the arts and cultural sector, I think we're going to say goodbye for today. Thank you for joining us. All right. Have great days, all.
Great seeing you, Emily.